Today, there are 2 million descendants of French-Canadian immigrants living in New England. These are our stories. Welcome to the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast.
Venez tous jeunes filles et garçons, je vais vous raconter l'histoire de notre immigration ici au USA, de grands aventuriers de pays étrangers.
This is the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast. I am Jesse Martineau. Now, this week, we are very happy to be joined by one of our favorite guests on the podcast, a guest most listeners will be familiar with, Dr. Kathleen Stein-Smith. Dr. Stein-Smith is a dedicated advocate for multilingualism and language education. She has authored several publications on the importance of language learning in global contexts. As a seasoned educator and speaker, she promotes the benefits of bilingualism and cultural competence. She is an officer or a officier dans l'ordre de palme académique, and also serves as the chair of the American Association of Teachers of French Commission on Advocacy. Dr. Stein-Smith's work emphasizes the role of language in fostering a global understanding and collaboration. And specifically to this discussion today, she was the driving force behind the book French All Around Us, which we have discussed on this podcast multiple times in the past, and which now has a second volume. Kathy, welcome back to the French Canadian Legacy Podcast.
And here it is, Volume 2.
Volume 2.
French All Around Us. And I am so incredibly grateful to all of the authors. We have several returning authors, including Jesse, yourself, and Monique, who have yet a new story, a new chapter to tell about French language and Francophone culture in the United States, and other returning authors. And we also have lots of new voices. You know, everyone who contributed to the first book got a shout out, a call for proposals, an invitation to contribute. And we have many returning voices telling new stories, new initiatives, new possibilities, new adventures, and then lots and lots of new voices. So I am so pleased to have this book here in hand. And also, though, I cannot thank enough our publisher, and that, of course, is my co-editor, Fabrice Jaumont, at CALEC and TBR Books. I'm so proud always to say when people will say, you know, how do you do this? And I say, you know, I don't know. I know my part of it, you know, talking to authors and having all the fun of putting the book together and reading the stories and talking about all the great things that are going on. But honestly, CALEC and TBR Books, they are a not-for-profit, which is one of the reasons why the book is available at such an affordable price. So almost everybody could have a copy, either a print book or an ebook. And that's very important. You know, it's important to get the story out. And that's also a reason why we're hard at work right now on the translation into French. People say, well, if the book is about French, why is it in English? And I'll say it is really to reach the American public.
Right.
You know, most Americans at the end of the day, they live their lives in English. They read and write in English. And to reach the American public, the book really needed to be in English. But also, intrinsic to its mission is that element of French, langue française, the culture francophone. And we are hard at work as we speak on bringing you the French translation of this second edition, as we did with edition 1. But kudos to CALEC, TBR Books, and first and foremost to Fabrice Jaumont.
It was an absolute honor again to be involved in this second book. And of course, friends of ours, Volume 2, Tim Beaulieu is coming with another one in this second book. But even individuals may not have heard from him the first time, and like Camden Martin, somebody's very familiar with the listeners of this podcast. You can read his story, his contribution, I should say, in this second book. So yeah, it's very, very, very fun. Just to see something. Claire Marie Bresson has a chapter in this book, just to see some of the names that are involved in it. Where did the idea for a second book even come from?
You know, I think it really came about the same way as the first book. You know, as you may recall, during COVID, we were meeting online, talking about the absolute necessity of keeping French language and Francophone culture as part of our conversation, but also of the public conversation. Those were, tragic times. Those were unprecedented times. And, out of those conversations came the first book, published in 2022. The French edition was published in 2023. And then really, from that moment, we were talking, among ourselves, among conversations amongst us authors. We're talking about, there are so many new things happening.
Sure.
Life had, in a sense, begun again. New initiatives were happening. Current initiatives were moving forward. People were transitioning in their lives. They were taking on new responsibilities, having new thoughts and ideas. But also, on the other hand, there is really a whole new set of challenges to all of us in all aspects of our lives, but also in terms of French language and Francophone culture. We work on various fronts, and I know, Jesse, you're aware of this. We work, in our schools, in our school districts. I know I hear wonderful conversations about the French immersion program that is due to launch in Manchester, New Hampshire. There are a lot of immersion programs, including French, in our country. At the last I read, French is number 2, second only to Spanish in the number of immersion programs. That is very cool, absolutely. Our schools are essential to work with communities to really capture the attention, the interest of youngsters from the time they're developing all of their skills, their verbal skills, all of their life knowledge skills, and that they're really learning not only in their family contexts, but in their communities. It's so important. Our schools at all levels, and of course there are challenges there too. There are budget shortfalls, there are program eliminations, and there are things that we need to face. You may say, well, why? And the reason is that, honestly, learning French is absolutely important. I mean, we live really in an Anglophone ocean here in the United States. We have, obviously, French-speaking people, Francophone culture here in the States. We have our neighbors to the north in Quebec and in Canada. But it's important that our children, that our future, that they learn French, that they learn about French language, they learn to speak, to understand, to use it as a medium of communication, not just something that they read about or heard about or kind of like know about as sort of a still life. The other thing is, though, children go to school, and it's important that we support our schools, certainly our children first and foremost, but certainly our schools and our educators, especially our French language and our immersion educators, but French language educators in all settings, from the elementary schools to our university and graduate levels. But then there's the rest of life. Do we really want French to be something that is a subject in school, as important as that may be? But don't we want it to permeate the rest of our life?
For sure.
That other, they used to say school was 8 hours a day, but the day is 24 hours a day. And what about the rest of our life, our time away from school? And that's really where I think people like yourself, Jesse, and many of you in New Hampshire, in New England, in Louisiana especially, but throughout our country, bring French into that rest of the life, the other 16 hours of the day, the school vacations, the weekends. There's a great program that it has been launched by, for example, the French Cultural Services. It's called Cine School. And it's a program where actually youngsters can see great French language content, movies and film and animation outside of school over the weekend, in the evening. We have to really bring French into our lives. And our authors in this second volume, especially, but in our first volume also, equally, talk about French in our schools, how to teach French, how to ensure that our children have the opportunity to learn French, but also how to bring French into our lives. Now, I know, Jesse, you have projects, you have the podcast certainly that we're on right now. There are lots of other projects. I know there's the Poutine Fest, there's the Franco-American Center, there's, of course, the Alliance Française. There are projects in New Orleans, our friends at the New Foundation in New Orleans, our friends at the Laura Plantation in Lafayette, Louisiana. They are bringing French into the whole of life through fun, through recreation, through entertainment. There's also a soccer tournament that has taken place for a while in New York the summertime. En français.
Very cool.
Very cool. Bringing it into our lives. And that's so important. Making French, making it appealing to all of us, to people who speak a lot of French, people who speak a little French, to speak French, to act their lives out in French. Whether their French is perfect or not, that's a whole other issue, and probably not so important because nothing in life is perfect. And I think that's really where we're all pointing right now. How do we really live our lives in French, immersed in Francophone culture, in person, online, through social media, obviously through music and the arts, and also through, social interactions, whether they're online or hybrid or on Zoom. So I think that's really where we are now. We're at this new point in this evolving story of French in North America.
And it's just such a cool opportunity to have this second volume because, I mean, for me, it feels like a lifetime away because I remember writing the first one while I was a student up in Quebec City. That's when I wrote
That's
my
right.
first chapter, and that seems like forever ago. And it's just so much that has been done since then. And for me, it was wild too because the timing of this second one just happened to be up in Montreal for the Notre Rêve Américain documentary, and
Yes.
when they had the initial showing of that. So I got to write the majority of this second chapter while I was hanging out in Montreal for that.
And you were
That was
you
so
were
cool.
wonderful in that.
I think it was just a very, very cool opportunity to be a part of all of these things. But as you noted, there's just so much that is constantly going on that it does present an opportunity to have a second edition, to tell more stories, to hear from voices that we necessarily did not get the opportunity to hear from the first time, which I think is super, super exciting. Can you tell us one thing I think is always cool with this, as was the case in the first book? We got a cool forward to this second volume as well. Can you just let us know who did the forward for us on this volume 2, and how do we make that happen?
We have the foreword. I'm looking at the preface, the acknowledgement, and then we have the foreword from Ambassador Iphigenia Contoleontos, who has been the permanent observer for the International Organization of La Francophonie, the OIF, the OEF, in the United Nations. Now, as many of you may recall, Ambassador Contoleontos was our host for the launch of Volume 1, which, we were really very fortunate to have that book launch at the New York headquarters of the OIF in Manhattan, in the same neighborhood, a couple blocks away from the United Nations building. She also wrote the foreword for this second volume. The OIF have been great supporters of this project. They were active participants in the translation of Volume 1. And it's my understanding that they are big supporters of the translation into French of Volume 2. Cool. And they did give us the opportunity to have that book launch where many of the authors were able to come to New York and spend time together as well as at the book launch event, which was then filmed and streamed by the folks at French Morning, headed up by Emmanuel Saint-Martin that day. And so that gave an opportunity for Jesse, yourself, among others, to actually tell your story to the people in the room. We had ambassadors there from quite a few French-speaking countries. They have that whole group of Francophone ambassadors at the UN, and many of them came to that book launch, as well as friends of ourselves and ourselves included. But we
Sure.
had the opportunity to share that moment and those words and that time together with also everybody who was watching the live stream on Facebook, which was available. It may still be available, but last time I looked, it was. But available and had many, many views. And many thanks also to the folks at French Morning for their support in that.
That was that evening. I mean, that event was just mind blowing to begin with, to be part of that. But that evening is something I will remember forever. That night was just incredible. Everybody just together talking the story. It's very, I mean, it's the first time because we have people from all over the country that flew in for that event. We had all like at least me, I have the benefit of doing the podcast. So I had talked to the vast majority of the people who were a part of that event, but seeing each other in person for the first time and then being all together for the first time, making the connections that we necessarily hadn't been able to do before. Man, that was just wild. That was just so, so cool. That was just all these people who, in their own separate walks of life, in their own separate space, find a way to do everything they can for the Francophone story. It was just so cool. It was just so cool to be part of that event, which was very, very special. So I'm very, very
You know,
glad.
you're so right. I can't help but agree with you. You know, sometimes being in the same room, looking eye to eye, making eye contact with someone, shaking their hand, giving them a hug, that, you know, as wonderful as online communication can be, there's nothing that beats that personal connectedness.
Now you're getting all these authors from all over the place talking about different topics, some academic, some stories, some just different approaches. It was very open for what each author wanted to do with kind of their chapter.
Mhm.
And how do you determine the order in which they appear in the book? And was that
Okay,
approach
now,
any
now,
different this time than the first time?
now that's part of the book that I'm not involved with.
Gotcha.
So I imagine it is my co-editor that it would be and publisher. It would be his vision of how the story would best be told. And I know, see, me, you know, being a teacher, being a librarian, you know, I put authors alphabetically. And I do this
There.
in articles that I write with other people. I list us all alphabetically. And but there is an element of art in determining how the story is best told. And I know, for example, there was that I'm sure had something to do with it. It didn't have anything to do with the alphabet or the order in which the chapters came in. And the selection process was very interesting. You know, a lot of people sent proposals, very interesting. And most of the people that sent proposals actually ended up appearing in the final publication. There
Nice.
were a few that had other commitments, couldn't participate. There were some of the authors from the first book. Interestingly, either they were had other engagements, other commitments, couldn't participate, or felt they had nothing additional to add to their first chapter.
Right.
But interestingly, some of them actually recommended others.
Sure.
So some of our current authors and some of the authors from the first volume actually said, but you know, I can't do it now, or I don't feel I have that much new to add, but I know ABC, who has a great story to tell. So actually, it's interesting. I know most of the authors. There are a few of them, though, that were brought to my attention. And I haven't always, I've had the pleasure of corresponding with them, but not actually of shaking their hand and
Sure.
making eye contact with them.
That's awesome. Now, something you and your co-editor, Fabrice Jumont, kind of mentioned in the introduction to this book are a couple of concepts that I actually highlighted when I was going through because I found them interesting. The
Oh,
whole
wow,
idea.
thank you.
Well, you're
Yeah,
welcome.
trust me, my family doesn't think anything I say is interesting. So I'm highly
Well,
complimented.
I think they're incorrect because the whole idea the Franco responsibilité and Franco activism and how those are two kind of different but related concepts. I found that discussion to be interesting. Maybe you can explain kind of what that is about.
Oh, wow. And that is so where I am right now in my
Yeah,
own thinking.
sure.
Um, The first time I think I saw the word franco-responsabilité was in an article in France Amérique, the lamented France Amérique magazine, several years ago. And it was talking about franco-responsabilité in Louisiana. And they were talking, I think they gave us there the example of Lafayette and the campaign for providing services in businesses in French. And this is going back quite a few years now. My recollections could be a little bit hazy. But I liked that idea of responsibility. And, you think about it, we are language speakers. We are some of us language educators. We are some of us language stakeholders and supporters. And we all share, as human beings, as citizens, as speakers of our languages, we share responsibility. And that, I think, is the next step. I think our next step is now to take it forward. I know I was honored this past spring to actually receive my decoration as an officier from the French government at the Villa Albertine in New York. And in my thank you, it is greatest honor I've ever received. And I had received the certificate several years ago, but this was actually the ceremony, along with others receiving their awards. But in my thank you address, I ended it by saying that it's time for us all to be responsible, to speak French whenever, wherever, however we can. And I know I teach classes, which are somewhat structured and academic, they're college classes. But I also do 2 French conversation groups online. And I know, Jesse, you were our guest at our library conversation group a while ago. And, I end each session by saying, alors, quel est le meilleur conseil? And then I hear different people saying different things. I was like, parlez français. Okay. And that, I think, is where we need to go next. We've got the idea of really supporting our schools,
Sure,
giving kids this opportunity to learn French, making sure language learning is affordable, accessible, that there are the programs they need, the accessibility that all our students need. Don't leave anybody out, be inclusive. And also the availability of summer programs, online programs, after school programs. But now there's this extra step of really being responsible, making sure French is spoken, not just something that's in school or that's in just the educational setting. It can be in settings that are far from being educational. The things we do every day, the things we do when we're acting silly, the things we do on the weekend. And I really think that idea of being responsible, and it's interesting because the word was, from what I've read, the word was coined actually by a business in Quebec. And they had this idea that they were going to be sure that they provided all their services to their clients in French. That idea has kind of taken hold. And the article in France Amérique talked about the campaign that was launched by Codafil, Ici on parle français, with the little buttons people were wearing in the businesses a few years back. And I think that's really it. We can, in our lives, in our social circle, for example, speak French. Today I happened to be at a French conversation group at my local library. We were on the front lawn. It was a beautiful day. So we were on lawn chairs out on the front lawn of the library speaking French. It's not a group that I convened. This is a different group. And we're friends. And we correspond during the week. Some of the folks go out for coffee. They go to see movies together. And I think a lot of the time they're speaking French to each other. Even though, we're here in New Jersey. We're in a suburb of New York, a close suburb of New York. And that's just an example of people doing that. Also, this idea of, years ago, there was a book called The Filter Bubble. And it was how basically online, for good or ill, people kind of unwittingly would surround themselves with a bubble.
Sure.
In our search engine searches, we search for different things, different topics, different
Right.
people. And the algorithms for all the search engines are built to bring us back what they think we want, what they think we like, based on what we've searched before. We see this with advertisements, but it's also more subtle in our Google searches. Well, I mean, we can build our own bubble, not exactly the filter bubble, but we can build our own bubble around us. Years ago, there was a fellow by the name of Trimnell who wrote a book about how to learn a language. And it was before social media. And he talked about magazines and newspapers and TV shows. But now it's really so easy. There's a world of content online. There's a world of social media. There's a world of events. In addition to the events that you can have on your library lawn or in your own backyard. And there are ways really to build our lives in French, our lives maybe centering on Francophone culture, not to the exclusion, obviously, of friends and family and the communities where we live, but we can have that Francophone space. It's not that hard anymore. And I think that is that Franco responsibility. We can be responsible for speaking French as often as we can, for reading as many books about Francophone culture, for reading all of those great novels and books that have come out of New England, for example, about the New England experience. We have one of our authors, David Vermette, A Distinct Alien Race. That was a great book about
Sure.
Franco-American culture in our country, whether you read it in the English or the French edition. So we can do that.
Which is
And
amazing.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, and I was just saying activism. Now,
Yeah, please.
Jesse, I don't have to tell you about activism. You are an activist.
I mean,
You've created the podcast. You've created the heritage.org. You've created, you've spoken with me, I know, at the NOLT conference in New Hampshire Association of World Language Teachers on at least 2 occasions about the importance of bringing French into the lives of our communities, our young people. So I don't have to tell you anything about activism. You are an activist, a Franco activist.
I don't think anybody has put in the hours, the dedication to activism. Nobody I know has put in the hours and dedication to activism that you have. It is absolutely tireless effort and dedication, and very clearly a passion for the Franco activism, and it's absolutely awesome the work that you've been able to do. The fact you're presenting all over the place all the time on this topic is massive. It's huge to our story, which is very much appreciated by all of us.
It's a funny thing. I'm not Franco-American, you know that.
I
But
do.
just so our audience does too, I'm not Franco-American. But I met French as a kid on vacation somewhere in the area around Trois-Rivières. I don't remember where it was. And I remember playing with other kids. They spoke French. I did not. But they were cool. They were nice to me. They included me. That made such an impression on my 8-year-old psyche. And I did study French here in New Jersey when I had the opportunity to in school. I was always interested. My mother did always say, you can't be an educated person if you don't speak French. But
Oh, wow.
She was not Franco-American either, but that's what she said.
I love it.
But as soon as I could, I basically took myself back to Quebec to go to school. And I do really have to say, when I think back now, when you're a kid, you just kind of take things for granted. But when I look back now, I'm thinking about the people who invited me to their homes, the people who took me to church with them, the people who included me in their outings with other French Canadian friends, all of the French Canadians who actually at University Laval that I came in contact with all really went out of their way to make me feel part of things, to make me feel welcome. It was never too much if you asked somebody for help or anything. It was never too much. Yeah, people went out of their way willingly. And, I think that personal connection, honestly has a great deal to do with it. And we can all build those personal connections.
Starting with building that bubble you were just talking about, which I think is a great approach. I was just thinking to myself how when we went up to a group of us went up to visit Patrick Lacroix up in Fort Kent, Maine, and there was maybe about a dozen of us at the table because some of the people Patrick knows up there joined us. And that conversation, the time we went out to dinner at the restaurant, was in French. That table was talking to each other in French, and that is the bubble. And we can have those conversations, and I think that's awesome. And that's very, very cool. And this book helps make that happen. It contributes to this. It helps that ultimate mission of what we are all trying to do. So again, it's been an absolute privilege to once again speak with Dr. Kathleen Stein-Smith. And we will put on the bottom of the notes for this podcast where everybody can go ahead and find a copy of French All Around Us, Volume 2. Kathy, thank you so much again for joining us.
Jesse, thank you so much for having me on the podcast this evening. I really do appreciate it. I know you have lots of people that you'd like to talk to, but also thank you for everything that you do. I think everything that you and Monique and your entire circle are doing to promote French language and Francophone culture in New Hampshire and beyond, I think these efforts are amazing. I cannot be more impressed by you, and I wish you all the best. If ever I can be of any assistance, please don't hesitate to call on me.
Well, I very much appreciate it, and I'm sure all of us will be ready for book 3 when that comes around too. Thanks,
From
Kathy.
your lips to God's ears.
That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jesse. Merci. À la prochaine.
À la prochaine.
Now our fathers look at us and sigh with despair, to think that everything they love we simply do not share. But the spirit never dies, our culture will survive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive.
Special thanks to Josie Vachon for providing the music. You can find more about her at josievachon.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Mike Campbell. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at fclpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at FCL Podcast for more information about the topics discussed. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this episode.